What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I want to talk about the updates that Nintendo is giving to certain Switch games on the Switch 2. As you know, there are two types of updates that Nintendo is rolling out for their Switch games on their new console. Free updates and Switch 2 editions, which are paid. Now, before today, I thought only the Switch 2 editions were interesting because we saw on the Nintendo Direct for the Switch 2 that they offered new content and they had 4K 60 patches. Even Metroid Prime 4 Beyond has a 120 FPS patch in both handheld and docked mode. But it seems that those free updates are also pretty significant depending on the game. And I have a theory that they could perhaps be even more significant than some people are realizing. So I'm going to detail that, and then I'm going to tell you 10 games that I hope get free updates on the Switch 2. So it's sort of a grab bag today for the video, but it's a fun topic, and I'm really excited for these Switch 2 updates, whether they be free or paid, because a lot of these games deserve another time to shine, and they deserve to do it in 4K, 60 FPS, 120 FPS, whatever it be. A lot of these games did not get a fair shake on the Switch because of how underpowered that system is. That's not a problem anymore with the Switch 2 coming in a few weeks. So I'm quite excited to see what they do with these updates. Also, wearing the glasses today because I have to read the descriptions of these free updates to kind of give you my theory about what might be going on with those free updates that Nintendo is doling out. All right, first of all, what are the 12 games that are getting free updates? Well, they're on Nintendo's website, and these updates are all coming on launch day. We didn't know that for sure when Nintendo first revealed that these 12 games would get updates, but we now know they're going to be coming out alongside the release of the Switch 2. So if you don't want to pick up Mario Kart World or any of the third-party games, there will be something for you to do on launch day. The 12 Switch games getting free updates on the Switch 2 are ARMS, Big Brain Academy, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics, Game Builder Garage, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, would be weird if they only did one of them, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, Super Mario Odyssey, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, and The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. First of all, kind of a weird assortment of selections here. I mean, Big Brain Academy, Clubhouse Games, Game Builder Garage, very odd choices. Even New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe is a bit of an odd choice to give an upgrade to. But the games chosen are not necessarily what's important here. What is important is the updates that Nintendo is giving to them. And before, they didn't tell us what the updates were going to entail, but just yesterday, Nintendo updated this website with what each upgrade is going to give the game itself. And I think some of these are kind of interesting. And again, I'm gonna go conspiracy mode for a second and speculate on perhaps there maybe being 120 FPS or 4K modes for certain titles. Let's talk about 120 FPS first. I think there are two games that could potentially be getting 120 FPS modes on the Switch 2, and those are 3D World and ARMS. 3D World, I think, has more convincing evidence, and I'll tell you why. In the description, it has 3 updates listed: visuals, frame rate, and HDR support. Frame rate, of course, is the relevant one for this section of the video, and it says this: optimized for smoother movement on Nintendo Switch 2, including Bowser's Fury. Now, the interesting wording there is including Bowser's Fury, because that would suggest that the frame rate is getting a boost not only in Bowser's Fury, where it really needs it, but also in the base game. And you might say, well, you're just reading into that. You're just using a semantics argument here. Well, if you look at the next line, it says HDR support, Bowser's Fury only. So if Bowser's Fury was really the only part of 3D World to get a frame rate upgrade, why would it not just say frame rate Bowser's Fury only? There's got to be something they're doing to 3D World in terms of its frame rate to give it an upgrade. Otherwise, they wouldn't say it how they did. At least that's what I think. Now, the interesting part of all of that is that 3D World runs at a rock-solid 60 FPS, both in handheld mode and in docked mode. Digital Foundry did a great video way back in 2021 talking about the performance and graphics of this game, and their conclusions were basically, this game never drops frames. It's consistently 60 FPS in the main game. Obviously, in Bowser's Fury, it constantly drops frames, but in the 3D World mode itself, it practically never drops below 60 FPS. So if they are doing a frame rate upgrade to 3D World itself and not just Bowser's Fury, and the game already runs at a smooth 60 FPS, what more could they do than add potentially a 120 FPS mode? Or at the very least, add an unlocked frame rate mode. You have that variable refresh rate display now, so you could just have it go 60 to 120 wherever it can go, and it would even look smoother that way. That was a very rudimentary explanation of the VRR display, but you get my point. So yeah, I find the wording here a bit interesting, and I think it could suggest that perhaps we're gonna get a 120 FPS patch for 3D World. Again, I could just be looking far too much into this, but if that's the case, that makes these free updates a lot more exciting. I didn't think we'd get anything close to that substantial for updates to Nintendo Switch games. And man, could you just imagine 120 FPS in 3D World? That game is already so fast and smooth on the Switch, it would be unbelievable to have that game run at twice the frame rate. But another game that I think is interesting in this conversation is ARMS. Now, I don't have as much experience with ARMS, but I'm pretty sure that game almost always runs in 60 FPS, except when you have that split screen mode. The description for the ARMS updates reads this: frame rate, optimized for Nintendo Switch 2 for smoother movement even when playing with 3 or more players. Now that wording is a bit more nebulous. It's not, in my opinion, as clear as the 3D World wording, which I think really does suggest that some sort of 120 FPS patch or something close to it might come to that game. The wording here could easily be interpreted as, it's going to be 60 FPS across the board, even when you go into split screen. But that phrase, even when, does technically suggest that it's not exclusive to that split screen mode, kind of what we were talking about with a 3D World base game where it says including Bowser's Fury. That would suggest that it is not just Bowser's Fury. If you say even when playing with 3 or more players, it would suggest that the frame rate boost in this update is not only going to be for when you are playing with 3 or more players, it will even be theoretically when you are playing just by yourself. And maybe there's going to be a 120 FPS mode when you're playing alone, and when you're playing in that split screen mode with friends, it's going to drop down to 60, because right now I do believe it drops down to 30. Again, that one is a little bit more of a stretch than even the 3D World one, and it could very easily be interpreted as, we're just going to make the split screen mode smoother and that's it. But I think that's another notable one. And it is interesting to note that only 5 games even have frame rate listed as an upgrade: 3D World, ARMS, Pokemon Scarlet, Pokemon Violet. Oh, it's just 4. Not 5, I can't count. And Pokemon Scarlet and Violet being the other 2 games included in that group, I think almost makes my point a little stronger, because interestingly, those 2 games have different wording. The Pokemon Scarlet and Violet games say frame rate improved for smoother movement on Switch 2, whereas ARMS and 3D World say optimized for smoother movement on Switch 2. We know that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet ran like complete crap, so it would make sense that they wouldn't try to go for 120 FPS or 4K. They would just try to get it at a stable 1080p 60, which it couldn't do on the Switch. Whereas ARMS and 3D World, we're already hitting those marks pretty consistently, so they don't need to be improved, but rather optimized. And again, semantics, we're reading into this really deeply, but that could mean that if frame rate is being improved, it's simply being raised to 60, but if it's being optimized, it's getting a boost above that to maybe 120. I don't know. It's just interesting. I don't see many people talking about this, and I think there is a good chance that this is suggesting a 120 FPS patch for at least 3D World, and maybe even ARMS. Now let's talk about the other aspect of these upgrades: high resolution. The phrasing here is interesting as well, and this one doesn't differ between games. It says visuals, optimized for the Nintendo Switch 2 display and high-resolution TVs for improved image quality. The phrasing, optimized for high-resolution TVs, to me, pretty strongly indicates that there is at least going to be 1440p support for some of these games, if not even 4K. There's 3 examples here that I think are interesting when talking about that. One is, again, Super Mario 3D World, which runs at an almost consistent 720p in a handheld and 1080p in docked mode. I must say, in that same Digital Foundry video, they say that sometimes the resolution drops a little bit below 1080p. But for a majority of the time, that game does run in 1080p 60. So how would this game be optimized for high-resolution TVs, if not with a 1440 patch or a 4K patch? Because this game was already running at 1080p for the majority of the time in docked mode. And if you're counting 1080p as a high resolution TV, then there isn't any upgrade here. It can already do that. So it must have at least a 1440p mode, but perhaps also a 4K mode. Or maybe it's natively 1440p and it's upscaled to 4K. Who knows? Another game that is a similar case to 3D World is New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, which has the same blurb about visuals that 3D World does. And in fact, that is the only upgrade that New Super Mario Bros. U is getting. It's not getting a frame rate boost, it's not getting HDR, it's not getting game sharing, it's just getting visuals, which is a little odd, but it does strengthen this point because New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe on the Switch runs at a rock-solid 720p in handheld and a rock-solid 1080p in docked mode. If New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe is being optimized for high-resolution TVs, it must be getting a bump to at least 1440p because that game never drops below 1080p in docked mode. And yes, you could say that this is just referencing the fact that the games will bump from 720p to 1080p in handheld, but again, it mentions TVs specifically. So I think it's pretty clear that we are at least getting 1440p support with these games, if not 4K support. One more I'll bring up in this discussion is Super Mario Odyssey, which in dock mode runs at a scaling resolution from 900p to 1080p and also has the same blurb about visuals. Would they mention an upgrade like that just to give it a 180p boost in docked mode and a 200-something p boost in handheld? I'm not really sure about that. So that's another one where I think because they're mentioning it having upgraded visuals, especially on the TV, which is referenced specifically, there must be some sort of 1440p or even 4K mode for Odyssey. Which, speculation aside, if that's true, oh man, is Odyssey going to look amazing in 4K. Oh, I cannot wait to see, if this is true, that patch. That might be one of the first things I try out on day one of the Switch 2 because I just can't wait to see how beautiful that game runs on the Switch 2. So the point in all of this is that there is real evidence on this website that Nintendo is offering potentially 120 FPS patches for some of their Switch 1 games in these free updates, and even more convincing evidence that they're offering 1440p or maybe even 4K patches for these free updates, which I did not expect whatsoever. Maybe I was being pessimistic, but I expected these updates to be simply, okay, the game runs at 1080p 60 and docked in handheld, that's it. We're not giving you anything else. But a lot of these games are getting HDR support, and it seems like some of them might be getting significant patches for frame rate and resolution, which is really exciting. Some of these games I can't wait to go back and see. 3D World and Bowser's Fury is one I'd be especially excited to go back to if there is a 120 FPS mode, but even if there isn't, Bowser's Fury in a consistent 1080p 60 or 4K 60 resolution is going to be a really nice sight to behold because that game drops frames constantly, even in docked mode on the Switch 1. And Odyssey, of course, like I said, is one that I would love to see in 4K 60. That would just be a dream to witness. And even games like Echoes of Wisdom and Link's Awakening, which also have HDR support and visuals mentioned, I wonder if those games would be able to get to 4K, maybe not. But even at 1440p or 1080p with a consistent 60 FPS, those games would look really good, especially in handheld mode. So those are two other games that I'm excited to see how they turn out with these free updates. But the real exciting part about this is that these free updates are pretty significant, and And I think we're going to get more in the future. You'll notice on this website that for every one of the updates, it says update available June 5th. And if this was the only wave of updates they were going to do, why would they specifically mention when the updates are going to be available? Why would they not just put it at the top of the screen? I think this website is going to be updated every so often with new Switch games that are going to get patches, which means that our favorite Switch games might get significant patches. Even if it's not 4K and 120 FPS, they still might get significant patches to make them run a lot better on Switch 2 for free. And that's really exciting. We don't have to potentially pay $10 or $20 to see certain games we love, but we know need a boost frame rate wise and graphically get upgraded. We might just get them for free. And again, none of this is confirmed, but I think there's a pretty good chance that 1440p or 4K support is coming in these free patches, and I think there's a chance that 120 FPS modes could come in certain games as well. So with all that said, I want to tell you 10 games on the Switch that I think would be really cool with free Switch upgrades, if they are going to be as significant as they seem like they're going to be. The first 4 games I want to shout out are all of the Xenoblade games on the Switch. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, Xenoblade 2, Xenoblade 3, and Xenoblade X Definitive Edition. All 4 of these games are awesome open world RPGs, but they do not look good at all on the Switch, and they don't run well either. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 gets the closest in terms of looking like a modern game, but all 4 of these games are really blurry. 1 and 2 especially do not run well whatsoever. I haven't played enough of 3 or X to tell you how well those games run, but 1 and 2 do not run well whatsoever. And these worlds are so colorful and so vast, they deserve to be at least in 1080p and 60 frames per second. I don't need 4K. I don't need 120 FPS, though. Could you imagine Xenoblade 2's battle system with 120 FPS? Oh my goodness. I just want 1080p 60. Please. It's all I ask. These games would be amazing if they just had that update. So those are my first 4 games. All 4 of those games deserve an update. And I think those 4 games make more sense as free updates rather than Switch 2 editions, because most of those games, in fact, all of those games, have extra side content added in, whether it be through DLC in 2 and 3, or just with the Definitive Edition in 1 and X. I don't really know what else you would add to make it a Switch 2 edition, so I think that makes sense. Just give them all patches, and then maybe in a few years, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Definitive Edition happens and fixes some of the issues with that game. Because as much as I like that game, it has issues that need a lot more than just a simple patch to fix. All right, the next game I have here is Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is a game that I liked. I didn't finish it, but I loved what I played of it, but man, that game looks like absolute trash. I don't want to be mean, but it looks terrible on the Switch. And again, it's not Fire Emblem's fault. It's the Nintendo Switch's fault. Fire Emblem has an awesome art direction. It's super stylish, but you wouldn't be able to tell based off of how it runs on the Switch. It is very grainy. Obviously, a frame rate bump would be nice too, especially in the more open sections of the school where the frame rate does take quite a few dips. But a resolution bump, I think, is the most necessary addition for this game, and I think that would make a lot of sense. Again, I'm not sure what you would add to that, considering Fire Emblem is another one of those series that gets plenty of DLC whenever a new entry comes out, so I don't think you need a Switch 2 edition, although you could argue it would be nice to have a bundle with all the DLC, but Breath of the Wild doesn't even have the DLC on its Switch 2 edition, so I don't know, it's a whole thing. I think Fire Emblem would make more sense as a simple free upgrade. The next game I have here is Mario & Luigi Brothership. This is another game that is a victim of the Nintendo Switch. It's really stylish, it's really colorful, but man, it just does not look that good graphically. It's very blurry on the Switch, and it runs terribly. I was shocked by how badly this game runs and how often it drops frames. And it really shouldn't, right? Because it is a Mario and Luigi game. It's kind of random for it to have so many frame rate drops, but it does. The Switch just cannot handle this game for whatever reason. It deserves a Switch 2 upgrade of some sort really badly. This has been one that a lot of people have suggested for a Switch 2 edition. And the path is pretty obvious, right? Just give it a Bowser's Minions mode like the other Mario and Luigi games got on the 3DS. But I don't want to see that because I still haven't finished this game and it's super long and I don't want more content for it. I just want it to look better. Maybe later on we can get a DLC update for it, but right now, just give us a free patch and go on to the next Switch 2 edition. I got 2 Metroid games here that I think would be awesome for this: Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered. Now, these are ones that could use a bit of a resolution bump, especially Metroid Dread, which does look a little blurry at times, but these are ones that I think we could shoot a little higher with. Just imagine a 120 FPS mode for Metroid Dread or Metroid Prime Remastered. Oh my goodness, that would be incredible. And these are 2 games that run really well on the Switch. I believe Dread is a consistent 60, and I know Prime Remastered is a consistent 60. So these are games that don't need improved frame rates, but maybe could use optimized frame rates that bring them up to 120 FPS. Prime Remastered also would be a really good candidate for mouse controls. And mouse control updates are not exclusive to Switch 2 editions because Game Builder Garage does support Switch 2 MouseCon controls. So it is possible that in future free updates, we get that feature for games that could use it. Regardless, I think a 120 FPS mode would make a lot of sense for both of these games. We know Prime 4 is getting it, so Prime Remastered certainly could get it as well if they care enough to do it, and that would be incredible. The next one I have here is one that just simply is not going to happen, and that's Splatoon 3. Splatoon 3 is a game that runs pretty flawlessly on the Switch. I believe it runs 720p and 1080p, 60 frames per second. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't remember any frame rate drops, and the game looks awesome on the Switch. So why not give us a 4K and or 120 FPS mode? Could you imagine Splatoon in 120 frames per second? That would be unbelievable. I just did so you probably didn't even hear me say unbelievable, but that would be unbelievable. The reason this isn't going to happen is because we know Splatoon 4 is very well along in development. We can assume that it's probably going to come out next year or the year after. They're not going to give an upgrade to Splatoon 3 with Splatoon 4 on the horizon, but man, I wish they would. At least we know that Splatoon 4 is coming soon, and I would imagine that's going to have a 120 FPS mode and mouse controls and the like. The last update candidate I have here is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. People have also brought up Thousand Year Door as a game that could get a Switch 2 edition, because obviously there's the side adventure that Luigi goes on that is only mentioned in the story and you don't actually get to see it, called the Marvelous Compass. But for me, I think a lot of the charm of that side mode is that we don't get to see it, and it's just up to our imagination of what crazy adventures Luigi is getting on. But as cool as the Marvelous Compass would be to see realized into an actual side mode, I'd be worried that they wouldn't nail it, and I would be disappointed by it. So I kind of just want it to be its own imaginary thing that we never actually see. I think there's some beauty in that. And so why not just give us a 4K 60 FPS mode? I mean, this game has to get a 60 FPS upgrade at some point, in some way, right? Because people are clamoring for it. The GameCube game already ran at 60. Bring it back to its proper glory there. And I think this game had a 4K mode buried in the code, so it would make a lot of sense to release that to the public in a free update. And man, this game would just look unbelievable in 4K. It's one of the best looking Switch games, period. It would be one of the best looking Switch 2 games if it got a 4K patch. There's some other games that would make sense for free updates, but I think they might make sense more for Switch 2 editions, but we'll stick to that in another video because this one is getting pretty long. We'll stick to that in another video. What does that even mean? There's no way that's a saying. With that said, that's about it for my discussion of Nintendo Switch 2 free upgrades for Switch 1 games. I'm all of a sudden pretty darn excited for these. I didn't think they were going to be so substantial, but like I said, I think there's a chance that some of these upgrades give us 4K and or 120 FPS support, and that would be so cool to see, because again, I thought that was going to be a paid thing, but it seems like the demarcation between Switch free upgrades and Switch 2 editions is whether or not Nintendo has something new to add to them. We'll see that tested this fall when Pokemon and Metroid Prime 4 get their Switch 2 editions, because I think there is a chance that Those games don't have any added content, but they're probably going to charge for those Switch 2 editions, so I don't really know. But it seems like, for the most part, if Nintendo doesn't have something new to offer on the Switch 2 for a game, they'll probably just give the patch for free. Because remember, even Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have Zelda notes and the app and all of that stuff. And even if they didn't, they are included on NSO, so I think they are kind of their own case. Every other Switch 2 edition that we know of, that we have information on, has some DLC involved with it. So yeah, I am really excited to see what the future holds for these free upgrades, and I really hope the Xenoblade games are a part of them at some point. But enough about me. Tell me in the comments, are you buying my theory about the fact that potentially there are going to be 120 FPS and 4K modes on some of these Switch 1 upgrades? And what game would you most like to see get a Switch 1 upgrade for free on the Switch 2? Tell me all of that in the comments. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that big, fat button. Share the video with someone who might like it, or someone who's doubtful of the fact that these Switch 1 upgrades are going to be significant, because I think they are going to be pretty big. And also be sure to watch my other recent video where I went over my 10 favorite Switch games and kind of gave the Switch a retrospective and gave a lot of my memories of the system. Because we are just under 3 weeks away from the Switch 2, which means the Switch 1 is soon to be gone, and that's sad, and I wanted to commemorate it, so I did. Be sure to check out that video. Be sure to stay tuned to the channel for all of the summer gaming news from Nintendo and everyone else, because it's going to be a busy summer for gaming. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one.